We're back. You are chatting with John P. Today, I'm going to be talking about some great options for those that are new to watch collecting. Some awesome watches for those that are new watch guys. Now, this video topic really stems from a conversation I just had a few days ago with my good friend Matt, and basically the story is Matt is pretty new to watch collecting, and he knows that I've been a long time watch collector, and obviously I have this video, and we were kind of talking about which watches he likes a lot, and it kind of got me thinking, even when I started watch collecting a little over 10 years ago, I really didn't know what watches were respected from other watch collectors. And that wasn't the biggest part of it for me. I was certainly gravitated towards the watches that I liked. But when you jump into a hobby, and when I jumped into a hobby, I also wanted to make sure that I could talk with other people about watches, right? That's part of the fun of any hobby, let alone something that's so diverse as watch collecting is, in the comments below, for example, right after you thumbs up, like, and subscribe, you can talk about watches with other people. So if there's any in this list that I miss, please make sure to leave your suggestions for Matt in the comments below. So let's look at these watches, and I'd like to say that I considered the watches and I kind of rated them in my head on a couple of different angles. First, the movements all had to be workhorse or respectable in some regard. The watch brand needed to have some notoriety, and with that comes the heritage or the story around the brand. I always like to suggest watch brands that have some unique story or some story that's recognizable and long-standing. There's a lot of micro brands and things like that that can deliver great value, but when you're getting into watches and you want something that you can relate to others with, especially the heritage and the story that comes with the brand and the feeling and kind of the vibe, I think is pretty important. And lastly, price point. There's going to be one watch on the list that kind of starts encroaching on the upper segments of price points, but the rest of them are going to be much more approachable in relation to where, certainly luxury watches can take you, but not quite as approachable as some micro brands offer for the same spec for the price point. But once again, it's because I do recommend a solid brand or brand heritage when you're first starting out. And then once again, you're going to be more willing to keep that watch long term because of potentially what might be timelessness, and you can kind of remember when you started watch collecting. It's kind of a fun little thing that happens with watch collectors. But first, I recommend early Breitling Chronomats from about the early 2000s. Now, they have so many limited editions, and there's so many different styles and colors, and that's what I love about this watch. Now, the watch features, or the series of watches from Breitling feature basically a 7750 unmodified. They put their name on the rotor in some cases, but as the watches kind of got newer and newer, they made some modifications to the Valjoux 7750 chronograph movement, but workhorse movement proven over decades and decades of long-standing use and maintenance and service intervals. So certainly this movement is not going to let you down. But the best part about this is you get that Breitling heritage. Now, I know sometimes I say some things that can be construed as negative about Breitling, but it's mostly the business, right? It's mostly where Breitling has kind of gone in recent times. It has nothing to do about the heritage behind Breitling or early Breitling, and I've said it in other videos, but early 2000s, late 90s Breitling I love for all these reasons. And the amount of limited editions that they produced. Go to Google, type in early Breitling Chronomat limited editions. They have dozens and dozens and dozens. So quite literally, even if you're not into planes, they also made NBA team dials, right? There's a Knicks style. I think there's a Celtics style. There's all these dials of these watches, so you can kind of have a little bit of fun with it as well. And generally under $2,000 and sometimes as low as $1,200, one of these watches can be yours. I will die down on the Breitling a little bit before you all accuse me of being a huge Breitling fanboy. Next, we have a Nomos, and particularly the Club, their more approachable model. Now, what you get is you get a watch that is made with an in-house movement with German standard manufacturing techniques. And while Nomos is a newer brand, being out in the 90s, they really didn't get popular until basically the late 2000s in the watch collecting scene, and that's really when they started developing or getting into at least widespread offering of their in-house movements. Particularly the in-house movement we have here is the manual wind caliber alpha movement, and they decorate the movements even if you can't see them through display casebacks, though they do charge you for display casebacks. So depending on if you really need that, that's one thing or another. But I think perhaps they charge you about $100 extra. Now you get these things under $2,000. I think $1,500 is probably for the smaller size, the retail price. But what's so great about Nomos is that among watch collectors, the fact that they produce these movements, they're in-house movements, and they were one of the first brands to really kind of set aside the fact that they could use off-the-shelf movements or kind of modify them and create their own movements. They were really one of the first to really believe in that mentality. Much before Tudor had their in-house movements and all the other brands started developing their in-house segments, Nomos was really there, and they were a new brand, and they really held true to that. And of course, they're approachable. So that's why they get a lot of nods from collectors. I don't think the brand recognition is quite yet there with all the others I'm talking about today, but if that's not the most important thing, but value in having that kind of special movement, you're kind of a technical person, I think Nomos is a great option for you as a new watch guy. Now that takes us in to this watch, which is iconic. I actually have it here on the table. And there's different variations of it, but an Omega Seamaster, particularly, this is the Omega Seamaster Bond Blue Wave Dial. If you know the watch, you know it's classic. It's quintessential watch collector's icon. And what I love about this watch is it's kind of timeless in the fact that the overall style and feel of the watch still exists. It's kind of like a Submariner, like a Rolex Submariner. They update this model every so many years, or even seems like recently almost every year, with the ceramic bezel flat dial and the ceramic bezel wave dial and the different color combinations. But what's cool, once again, is that they update this thing, and it's still, the modern versions of the watch still feel and look similarly. You know where it came from, but also it's updated for modern specs. And so when you consider these, you can pick these up, pre-owned, perhaps on eBay. I hate to say it. I'm not the biggest advocate of that place, but nonetheless, pick these up, $1,200, and I mean, that's on a good day, an absolute best case scenario, all the way up to perhaps $2,500, really great condition, box and paper. So to have that iconic watch that you can still wear alongside anything else later in your kind of watch collecting career, so to speak, is really cool. And that's something I always see when I put that watch on my wrist, or others that I used to wear 10 years ago. It's something nostalgic, and that's why I recommend this watch. And of course, it's a great watch as well. And even though particularly this watch has a closed caseback, you cannot see the movement. Hans had the watch open on his bench, and the movement is fully decorated, much like they would be showing you if it had an exhibition caseback. So once again, it's the subtleties, it's the little bit of things that are introduced in luxury and watches that are nice and kind of keep us going. But that's besides the point. Rolling into the next one now, I know I also say some things about Tudor, but once again, it's more strategy Tudor, it's more branding, it's not necessarily the watches, and we have Tudor BlackBay. Now, if you're just starting out as a watch collector, something that you might be kind of addicted to, I want to say, is swapping out straps. I remember when I first started collecting watches, swapping straps was a way that I could almost introduce an entirely new style to my wrist without having to buy another watch. Now, I'm fortunate that we have delraywatch.com here, where we have hundreds of watches and so many watches come through the door, where I kind of get my fix in that way now, where I put on so many different watches and we get to have fun in that regard and kind of scratch that itch in that way. But if you don't have kind of necessarily the access to all the watches in different styles and colors, and maybe there's not even an authorized dealer around where you can go and kind of try things on, especially in COVID times, straps are a great way that you can kind of mix things up a bit. And with straps typically come dive watches, and with that, here we are at the Tudor BlackBay. Now, it's a good watch, right? The watches are going to have base movements, but sufficient base movements. The watches are going to be rugged and durable. They're going to be attractive. You can see with the BlackBay 58, sure, the bracelets have pretend rivets. But then again, when we're talking at this price point and in modern spec, it's really for the design and the aesthetic and kind of that nostalgia or feeling of being vintage more than it is to actually be a deprecated method of building watch bracelets, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to use an outdated methodology of building something just because you can. But if you can get the same style and achieve that by having modern day specs in the product, why wouldn't you? And that's what they do. So I recommend the Tudor BlackBay. And once again, the great thing about this brand or this particular model from Tudor is that there's so many versions. You got the bronze, you got the 2 versions of the bronze. You have every color under the sun. Now you have different sizes, you have a GMT, you have a Pepsi, and it's almost like you're kind of trying out where you could go with Rolex and some of the other brands at a more approachable price point. And if you buy them pre-owned, you're not going to take a bath either. So even if you feel like as a new collector, you kind of tried out some things and it wasn't for you, you can flip it or swap it out and get something that is more your style. So Tudor BlackBay, I think, is also a great option. Now, lastly, this one is a little bit less approachable in terms of price point, but then again, it just depends, where you are. And this is where we get into the Rolex with the Rolex Oyster Perpetual in either the 34, the 36, or 39, so modern day Rolex Oyster Perpetual. And I actually have the 39 in the red grape, or really the purple, on the wrist today. And I got to admit, probably 6 months ago, I think I got into a conversation here with Fed, and we were talking about the Rolex Oyster Perpetual and how it was a little bit underwhelming and it didn't really do a whole lot for us. And, this seems to be somewhat of a recurring theme on this channel, and in at least the way that I kind of convey my opinions about watches is I like interesting things, different things that are kind of special. And with Rolex, unfortunately, they are mass-produced, though I think it took actually putting this watch on my wrist after, Fed and I both had purchased them for each other for being in business for a certain amount of time. When I put this on my wrist and I actually started wearing it, it just grew on me. Now, I've had other Rolexes and I still own other Rolexes, but I think for an entry-level offering from a brand, it doesn't really get much better than what we have here. Now, I did another video review where you can see in depth what I think about the watch and the specs on it, and a little bit more in terms of camera time. But I really do think that, if you're there or you can swing it, or it's something that you're willing to kind of either save up for or kind of budget for accordingly, I think it's a watch you'll probably never take out of your collection, and it will be timeless forever because of the Oyster case. But guys, what other watches would you recommend for my new watch guy friend Matt? Not new friend, I've been friends with him for 20 years, but he's new-ish to watches, and I want to hear what recommendations that you have for him. Please leave them in the comments below, and also please do not forget the thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And of course, don't forget to check out delraywatch.com, where we've just added a new watch section, and it's actually been quite a hit. I was surprised so many people are buying new still instead of used, but I guess there's just some watches you can't find pre-owned. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P. Ciao.